Arthur Conan Doyle, The Brazilian Cat. Imagine my position, a young man with refined tastes, high hopes, and aristocratic connections, but without a penny in his pocket and without a worthwhile profession. The fact was that my father, a good-natured and cheerful man, had such faith in the generosity of his wealthy bachelor elder brother, Lord Southerton, that my future caused him no anxiety. He believed that if a vacancy could not be found for me in the vast Southerton estates, then at the very least some diplomatic post would be found among those that are the prerogative of the upper class. He died too soon to realize the total error of his calculations. Neither my uncle nor the government authorities showed the slightest interest in me or my career. From time to time, I was sent a brace of pheasants or a basket of hares. Nothing else reminded me that I was the heir to Atwell House, one of the richest estates in the country. Thus, I was single, led a social life, and rented an apartment in Grosvenor Mansions. My activities were limited to pigeon shooting and playing polo at Hullingham. As time went on, it became increasingly difficult to obtain payment extensions from creditors and to borrow money against my future inheritance. The crash was approaching inexorably, and with each passing day, I saw it more clearly. My sense of poverty was made all the more acute by the fact that, besides the wealthy Lord Southerton, all my other relatives were also quite well-to-do. The closest of them was Everard King, my father's nephew and my first cousin, who, after long years of adventure in Brazil, had returned to his homeland to enjoy the fruits of his wealth. No one knew how he had managed to amass his fortune, but it was clear that it was quite substantial, for he had purchased the estate of Greylands near the town of Clipton-on-the-Marsh in the county of Suffolk. In the first year of his stay in England, he noticed me no more than my stingy uncle did. But one summer morning, to my great relief and joy, I received a letter from him with an invitation to go to Greylands that very day and stay there for a while. I was facing a considerable amount of time in bankruptcy court, and I thought the letter had been sent to me by Providence itself. If I could get close to this unknown relative, I might still pull through. For the sake of the family reputation, he would not allow me to go under. I ordered my servant to pack my suitcase and left for Clipton-on-the-Marsh that evening. After a change at Ipswich, a small local train brought me to a deserted station, where a slow-flowing river meandered among grass-grown hills. The high, silted banks spoke of the work of the sea tides. No one met me. It later turned out that my telegram was late, and I hired a carriage at the local inn. The gallant driver praised my relative all the way, and according to him, it appeared that Mr. Everard King had managed to win universal respect in these parts. He worked with school children, allowed anyone who wished to walk on his lands, and spared no money for charitable purposes. In short, his generosity was so boundless that the driver could only explain it by a desire to become a member of Parliament. My attention was suddenly diverted from the driver's praises by a very beautiful bird sitting on a telegraph pole by the road. At first, I thought it was a jay, but it was larger and the plumage was lighter. The driver also noticed it and said that it belonged precisely to the man we were going to see. It turned out that breeding all sorts of exotic creatures was his passion, and he had brought many birds and animals from Brazil which he expected would settle in England. When we passed the gates of Greylands Park, I was able to see the truth of what had been said with my own eyes. Small spotted deer, a curious wild pig, I believe it is called a peccary, an oriole with magnificent plumage, an armadillo, a strange pigeon-toed animal resembling a very fat badger. This is an incomplete list of the creatures I saw as we drove along the winding path. On the doorstep, in his own person, stood my hitherto unknown cousin, Mr. Everard King. He had seen us from afar and guessed who was arriving. He literally radiated friendliness and comfort. In appearance, he was about 45 years old, thick-set, and his round, good-natured face, tanned dark by the tropical sun, was covered with countless tiny wrinkles. In his white linen suit and a large Panama hat tilted back, with a cigar between his teeth, he looked like a true planter. Such a figure was easy to imagine on the veranda of some bungalow, yet it seemed entirely out of place against the backdrop of a large stone house in the pure English style, with massive wings and Palladian columns at the entrance. "My dear," he cried, looking back. "My dear, here is our guest. Welcome, welcome to Greylands. I am delighted to meet you, my dear Marshal, and I am infinitely honored that you have chosen to grace this quiet country corner with your presence." Hearing such cordial words, I instantly felt at ease with him. However, despite all the hospitality of the host, I clearly sensed the coldness and even hostility of his wife, a tall woman with an exhausted face, who had come out of the house at his call. She was, apparently, Brazilian, and although she spoke English perfectly, I attributed the strangeness of her behavior to her ignorance of our customs. From the very beginning, she did not hide the fact that my visit did not please her much. Her speech, as a rule, did not go beyond the bounds of politeness, but her expressive black eyes spoke unmistakably of a desire for my speediest departure for London. However, my debts weighed too heavily upon me, and I valued the acquaintance of a wealthy relative too much for his wife's ill will to stand in my way. Thus, I ignored her challenge and tried to reciprocate the host's boundless affection for me. He spared no effort in trying to make my stay in his house as pleasant as possible. My room was delightful. He begged me to inform him of all my needs. I was tempted to say that only his signature on a blank check could save me in my distress, but I felt that at this stage of our acquaintance, such a thing would be premature. Dinner was magnificent, and when we later enjoyed Havana cigars and coffee grown, as he said, on his own plantation, I thought that the praises of my driver were not at all exaggerated, and that I had never met such a hearty and hospitable man. Yet, for all his friendliness, he proved to be a man of strong will and a seething temperament. I was able to see this for myself the very next morning. The strange antipathy that Mistress Everard King felt toward me proved so strong that her behavior at breakfast was almost insulting. An open clash occurred when her husband briefly left the room. "The most convenient train is at 12:15, she said, "but I did not intend to leave today." I replied honestly and perhaps even with some defiance, for I was firmly determined that this woman would not succeed in seeing me out. "Well, as you wish," she said, and fell silent, staring boldly straight into my eyes. "If Mr. Everard King," I remarked, "should feel that I am abusing his hospitality, he will, I am sure, tell me so." "What is this? What is this?" a voice rang out, and the host entered the room. He had heard my last words and understood everything else from the expressions on our faces. In an instant, his round, good-natured face took on an expression of absolute rage. "Could you step out for a moment, Marshal?" he said. "I should explain that my name is Marshal King." He closed the door behind me, after which for a second I could hear his low voice, full of barely suppressed indignation. The gross disregard for the rules of hospitality had clearly stung him deeply. Having no habit of eavesdropping, I went out for a walk on the lawn. Suddenly, I heard hurried footsteps behind me, and, turning around, saw Mistress King with a face pale from emotion and eyes full of tears. "My husband asked me to apologize to you, Mr. Marshal King," she said, standing before me with downcast eyes. "Not another word, Mistress King." Her black eyes suddenly flashed. "You fool!" she hissed in a furious whisper, and turning on her heel, she swept back into the house. The insult was so staggering and outrageous that I could only stand there, staring blankly after her. It was in this state that my host found me. He had regained his former affable manner. "My wife, I hope, has apologized for her foolish words," he said. "Oh, yes, certainly." He took me by the arm and began to walk with me back and forth upon the lawn. "Do not take it to heart," he said. "I should be beyond measure distressed if you were to curtail your visit by even an hour. The fact is, for we are kinsmen, and there should be no secrets between us. The fact is that my poor little wife is incredibly jealous. If anyone, no matter whether man or woman, comes between us for even a moment, she suffers actual torture. Her dream is an endless tete-a-tete on a desert island. Now you understand the reason for her actions, which, one must admit, border on the maniacal in this regard. Promise me that you will pay no attention to them." "I will not. Certainly not." "Then light your cigar, and let us go and see my little menagerie." The greater part of the day was spent inspecting all the birds, beasts, and reptiles he had brought from Brazil. Some roamed at large, others were kept in cages, and some lived right within the house. He spoke with enthusiasm of his successes and failures, of births and deaths, and like a boy, he would cry out with delight when some bright bird took flight from the grass, or some exotic beast scurried away into the bushes. At last, he led me down a corridor into one of the wings. There I saw a stout door with a small shuttered window. Beside it on the wall was fixed a windlass with an iron handle. Further on, the passage was barred by a massive iron grating. "I wish to show you the jewel of my collection," he said. "Since the death of the Rotterdam cub, there is but one other such specimen in Europe. It is the Brazilian cat. And how does it differ from an ordinary cat? You shall see for yourself," he smiled. "Be so good as to slide back the shutter and look inside." I obeyed and saw before me a large, empty room, paved with stone flags, with barred windows on the further wall. In the middle of the room, stretched out in a bright square of sunlight, lay a huge beast the size of a tiger, but the color of ebony. It appeared to be merely an immensely magnified and very well-groomed black cat, basking in the sun. There is so much grace in it, so much power, so much of a subtle and stealthy infernalness, that for a long time I could not take my eyes away. "Magnificent, is it not?" said my host with feeling. "Superb. I have never seen so noble a creature. They are sometimes called black pumas, but this is no puma. He is nearly 11 feet from nose to tail. For years ago, he was a ball of black fluff with 2 yellow beads for eyes. I bought him as a newborn cub at the headwaters of the Rio Negro. His mother was speared to death, but not before she had sent a dozen men to their graves. Are they truly so fierce? They are the most treacherous and bloodthirsty beasts in the world. One has but to mention the Brazilian cat to a jungle Indian to send him into a fit. They prefer human beings to any other prey. This fellow has never yet tasted hot, living blood, but if he once does, there will be no holding him. He tolerates no one in his lair but myself. Even Baldwin, who feeds him, dares not go near. I am both mother and father to him." Then, to my astonishment, he suddenly opened the door and slipped inside, instantly closing it behind him. Hearing the familiar voice, the huge, supple beast rose, yawned, and began to rub its round black head affectionately against its master's side, while he, in turn, patted and stroked it. "And now, Tommy, into the cage," he commanded. The giant cat immediately moved toward one of the walls and curled up under a grilled overhang. Everard King stepped out of the room, took hold of the iron handle I have mentioned, and began to turn it. As he did so, the grating in the corridor began to move into the room through a slot in the wall, closing off the front of the cage. When he had finished, he opened the door once more and led me into the chamber, where there hung that acrid, musty scent peculiar to the great carnivores. "So that is how it is all arranged," he said. "By day, we let him roam the room, and by night he stays in the cage. By turning the handle in the corridor, one can lock him in or let him out. You have seen how it is done. Careful! What are you doing?" I had thrust my hand through the bars to stroke the glossy, heaving flank. He hastily seized my arm and jerked it back, his face becoming grave. "I tell you, he is dangerous. Do not imagine that because he is fond of me, he will be the same with others. He is very fastidious. Aren't you, Tommy? There, he has already heard his dinner coming." A little man, in the stone-paved corridor, footsteps echoed, and the beast, springing to its feet, began to pace to and fro within the narrow cage. His yellow eyes gleamed, and his red tongue flickered between uneven rows of white teeth. A servant entered with a tray holding a large piece of meat. Approaching the cage, he flung the meat through the bars. The cat deftly caught the food with his claws and carried it to a far corner, where, pinning the morsel between his paws, he began to tear and shred it, occasionally lifting his blood-stained muzzle to glance at us. It was a sinister and fascinating sight. "Of course, I dote upon him," said my host as we walked back, "all the more because I raised him myself. It was no easy matter bringing him here from the heart of South America, but here he is, in warmth and comfort, and, as I said, the finest specimen in Europe. The zoological gardens are dying to get their hands on him, but I cannot bring myself to part with him. However, I have bored you enough with my hobby, so let us follow Tommy's example and go to dinner." My South American relative was so absorbed in his estate and its unusual inhabitants that, at first, it seemed to me he had no interest in the outside world. That he did indeed have interests, and pressing ones at that, soon became clear from the number of telegrams he received. They arrived at various times of the day, and he always read them with the greatest excitement. Whether it was news from races, I thought, or from the stock exchange. In any case, his attention was fixed on some urgent matters beyond the borders of Suffolk. On each of the 6 days of my stay, he received no fewer than 3 or 4 telegrams, and sometimes as many as 7 or 8. I spent those 6 days so pleasantly that, by the end, the most cordial relations were established between my cousin and me. Every evening we sat late in the billiard room, where he regaled me with stories of his incredible adventures in America, deeds so desperate and reckless that it was hard to reconcile them with the swarthy, thick-set man sitting before me. In turn, I allowed myself to recall certain episodes of London life. They interested him so much that he expressed a firm intention to visit me at Grosvenor Mansions. He said he was eager to plunge into the world of metropolitan amusements, and I may say without false modesty that he could not have found a better guide than myself. It was only on the final day that I ventured to speak frankly with him. I told him plainly of my financial difficulties and imminent ruin, after which I asked for his advice, though I was hoping for something more substantial. He listened attentively, puffing deeply on his cigar. "But listen," he said, "Are you not the heir to our kinsman, Lord Southerton?" "That is true, but he is not the kind of man to grant me an allowance." "Yes, I have heard of his stinginess." "My poor Marshal, you are indeed in a very difficult position. By the way, how is Lord Southerton's health?" "Since childhood, I have heard nothing but that he is in a critical condition. There it is. He creaks and creaks, and he will go on creaking for a long time yet. So you will have to wait and wait." "Heavens, what a fix you are in! I had hoped, sir, that knowing everything, you might agree to lend me—" "Not another word, my boy," he cried, seemingly much moved. "We shall return to this conversation tonight, and I assure you that I will do everything possible." I did not regret that my visit was drawing to a close, for I felt that at least one inhabitant of the house desired my departure with all her soul. The haggard face and hating eyes of Mistress King were becoming more and more unpleasant to me. Out of fear of her husband, she did not dare any direct rudeness, but her morbid jealousy manifested itself in the way she avoided me, never spoke to me, and tried in every way to dampen my stay at Greylands. On the last day, her behavior became so provocative that I would certainly have left, were it not for the promised evening talk with my host, upon which I placed great hopes. I had to wait until late for my cousin, who had received even more telegrams that day than usual, withdrew to his study after dinner, and did not emerge until the whole house was asleep. I heard him, according to his custom, going about and locking the doors for the night. At last, he entered the billiard room where I sat. His stout figure was clad in a dressing gown, and on his feet were bright Turkish slippers. Sitting down in an armchair, he prepared himself a glass of grog, in which, as I happened to notice, there was considerably more whiskey than water. "Heavens," he said, "what a night!" It was indeed a wretched night. The wind howled incessantly, and the barred windows rattled as if they might be blown in at any moment. Yet, the more the storm raged outside, the brighter the yellow lamps seemed to glow, and the more refined the aroma of our cigars became. "Now, my boy," the host addressed me, "no one will disturb us now, and we have the whole night before us. Tell me about the state of your affairs, and then it will be clear how to set them right. I want to know every detail." Encouraged by these words, I launched into a lengthy explanation, featuring all my tradesmen and creditors, from my landlord to my valet. I had all the figures noted in my pocketbook, and I may say with some pride that, by arranging the facts in a single row, I gave a very businesslike account of my unbusinesslike life and my precarious position. However, I noticed with some chagrin that my companion was extremely distracted, his gaze fixed upon vacancy. If he made a remark, it was so formal and hollow that it became clear he was not following the thread of my thoughts in the slightest. From time to time, he feigned interest, asking me to repeat something or explain it in more detail, only to sink immediately back into the same state of abstraction. At last, he rose and tossed his cigar, but into the fireplace. "Look here, my boy," he said to me, "I have had no head for figures since childhood, so forgive my dullness. Jot it all down on paper, and do not forget to show the total sum. When I see it before my eyes, I shall grasp it at once." The suggestion was encouraging. I promised to set everything down exactly as it was. And now it is time for bed. Good Lord, the clock has already struck 1. Indeed, through the furious roar of the storm, the chiming of the clock could be heard. The wind rushed like a veritable waterfall. "Before I sleep, I must look in on the cat," said my host. "He is always restless in windy weather. Will you come with me?" "Certainly," I replied. "Only walk quietly and do not speak, for everyone is asleep. Stepping noiselessly over the Persian carpet, we passed through the lighted hall to the further door. The stone corridor was dark, but the host took down and lighted a lantern that hung upon a hook. There was no grating in the passage, which meant the animal was inside its cage. "Come along," said my cousin, opening the door. The beast's restlessness was evident from the low growling that met us, and there we saw him in the flickering light of the lantern. He was curled in the corner of the cage like a huge black ball, casting a grotesque shadow upon the white wall. In his irritation, he lashed his tail against the straw bedding. "Poor Tommy is out of sorts," said Everard King, stepping closer to him with the lantern. "A regular black devil, isn't he? Never mind. He shall have his supper, and then all will be well. Be so good as to hold the lantern." I obeyed, and he turned back toward the door. "The larder is close by," he said. "Do you mind if I leave you for a moment?" He stepped out, and the door clanged shut behind him with a metallic ring. At the sharp sound, I started. A sudden wave of fear surged over me. A vague presentiment of monstrous treachery made my blood run cold. I dashed to the door, but it would not open from the inside. "Hey!" I shouted. "Let me out. It is quite all right. There is no need for noise." My host's voice came from the corridor. "You are holding the lantern very conveniently, but I do not wish to be left here alone under lock and key." "You do not?" I heard his full-blooded chuckle. "Well, you will not be alone for long. Let me out, sir," I repeated angrily. "Cease this cheap practical joke at once." "Cheap for some, but not for others," he said with another hideous laugh. And then, through the roar of the storm, I heard the long-drawn creak of the turning windlass and the clatter of the grating moving through the slot. Great God! He had released the Brazilian cat from its cage. The bars of the grating moved slowly past me in the lantern light. At the further end of the cage, a gap a foot wide had already formed. With a shriek, I seized the outermost bar with both hands, and with a mad determination, I strove to pull it back. I was truly mad. Rage and despair overflowed within me. For a minute or more, I succeeded in holding the grating motionless. I knew that he was putting all his strength into the handle, and that the leverage was in his favor. I was losing, inch by inch. My feet slipped upon the smooth stone flags, and I incessantly implored the pitiless murderer to spare me from so horrible a death. I appealed to our kinship. I reminded him of the bonds of hospitality. I asked what wrong I had done him. In answer, he only tugged the harder at the windlass, and still more bars disappeared into the slot. Despite all my resistance, he dragged me across the entire width of the cage, and at last I ceased the hopeless struggle. My wrists were cramped, and my fingers were stripped and bleeding. The grating clanged one last time, and I heard the receding shuffle of the Turkish slippers. Then the distant door slammed, and silence fell. All this time the beast had not moved. He lay motionless in his corner, and even his tail had ceased to lash. Just now, a screaming man had been dragged past him along with the grating, and the spectacle had clearly astonished him. His great eyes watched me with a steadfast gaze. While seizing the grating, I had dropped the lantern, but it was still burning upon the floor, and I made a move toward it, as if to find some protection. But at that very moment, the beast emitted a low, menaceful growl. I froze, trembling in every limb. The cat, if a word so domestic applies to this fiend of hell, was but 10 feet from me. His eyes shone in the darkness, seemingly phosphorescent. They terrified and fascinated me. I could not take my eyes away. In moments of supreme tension, Nature sometimes plays strange tricks upon us. It seemed to me as if those flickering lights were now flaring up, now fading in a wave-like rhythm. Now they diminished, becoming dazzlingly bright points, electric sparks in the darkness. Now they began to expand and expand, filling the entire corner of the room with a sinister, changing light. And suddenly, they were extinguished altogether. The beast had closed his eyes. Whether the old theory of subduing the animal gaze with the human proved true, or whether the huge cat simply wished to sleep, whatever it was, he, without showing the slightest desire to attack, lowered his sleek black head upon his mighty forepaws and appeared to fall asleep. I stood, fearing to rouse him with an incautious movement. Yet the malignant gaze no longer enthralled me, and I could collect my thoughts. So I was locked in for the whole night with a fierce carnivore. There could be no doubt that he was not less cruel than the polished scoundrel who had enticed me into this trap. On that point, his master's stories could be believed. How was I to endure until morning? There was no hope in the door, nor in the narrow, barred windows. In the empty room, with its stone floor, there was no hiding place. Calling for help was useless. Besides, the roar of the storm would drown out any of my screams. It remained only to rely upon my own courage and resourcefulness. Here, I glanced at the lantern, and a new wave of horror swept over me. The candle had melted down terribly and was guttering. It had no more than 10 minutes to burn, no more. This was exactly the time left to me for reflection. I felt that if I were left with this terrifying beast in the blackest darkness, I should lose the power of action. The very thought was unendurable. In my despair, I cast my eyes about my torture chamber and suddenly lighted upon a spot that seemed to promise. Not salvation, no, but at least not so immediate and inevitable a doom as the rest of the room. I have already said that, besides the front wall, the cage had also a roof, which remained in its place when the grating was withdrawn into the slot in the wall. It was made of iron bars, spaced some inches apart, and covered with strong wire mesh, while at the sides it rested upon massive supports. It overhung the crouching animal in the corner like a great grilled canopy. Between it and the ceiling, a space of some 2 or 3 feet remained. If I could manage to squeeze myself into this gap, I should be invulnerable from all sides but one. From beneath, from behind, from the sides, he could not reach me. A frontal attack alone was possible. From that, certainly, there was no protection, but in this way at least I should not be in the animal's direct path. To attack me, he would have to depart from his accustomed route. There was no time to ponder. If the lantern went out, hope would be at an end. Gasping for air, I sprang, seized the iron bar, and with a struggle, scrambled up upon the grating. Craning my neck, I looked down and was suddenly met by the ghastly eyes of the beast which was yawning. His fetid breath fanned my face, like the steam from some loathsome pot. However, he appeared more puzzled than angry. Rising, he stretched his long black back, a slight quiver running through his frame. Then, rearing up on his hind legs, he rested one forepaw against the wall and with the other clawed at the wire mesh upon which I lay. A single sharp white claw tore through my trousers. I must mention that I was in evening dress, and scratched my knee. This was not yet an attack, but rather a trial, for upon hearing my sharp cry, he dropped back to the floor, bounded lightly out of the cage, and began to run swiftly about the room, glancing up at me from time to time. I, meanwhile, squeezed myself as far back as possible against the wall, lying there and trying to take up as little space as I could. The further I retreated, the more difficult it became for him to reach me. From his movements, it was clear that he was excited. Swiftly and silently, he circled the room again and again, repeatedly passing beneath my metallic couch. It was astonishing. So massive a body moved almost like a shadow, with a barely perceptible rustle of velvet pads. The candle was guttering, and it became increasingly difficult to distinguish the beast. At last, with a final flare and a hiss, it went out. I was left in the darkness, face to face with the cat. The thought that everything possible has been done is always a comfort in the face of danger. There remains only to wait dispassionately for the end. I knew I had found the only spot that offered even a glimmer of hope for salvation. Stretching myself out like a string, I lay perfectly still, holding my breath, hoping the beast might forget my presence. I reckoned it was now about 2 in the morning. The sun would rise at 4. There remained no more than 2 hours until dawn. Outside, the storm still raged, and the rain lashed incessantly against the windows. The room was filled with an unbearable stench. I could neither see nor hear the cat. I tried to turn my thoughts to other things, but only one idea could make me forget my miserable plight for a moment. It was the thought of my cousin's villainy, of his incredible hypocrisy, and his animal hatred toward me. Beneath that friendly face lurked the soul of a medieval executioner. The more I thought, the more clearly I saw how cleverly it had all been planned. Naturally, he had pretended to go to bed. No doubt he had made sure he was seen doing so. Then he had slipped quietly downstairs, lured me here, and locked me in. According to his version, it would all seem very simple. He had left me to finish my cigar in the billiard room. Then I had taken it into my head to have one last look at the cat. I had entered the room without noticing the cage was open, and I had paid the price. How could his guilt be proven? Suspicion, perhaps, but evidence, none. How slowly those terrible 2 hours dragged by. At one point, a low, unpleasant sound reached me. It seemed the beast was licking his fur. Several times I noticed a flash of greenish eyes in the gloom, but the gaze did not linger on me, and I began to hope that the cat had either forgotten me or was indifferent to my presence. At last, a faint light began to glimmer through the windows. First, 2 dim gray squares appeared amidst the blackness. Then they turned white, and I saw my terrifying companion once more. Alas, he saw me too. It was clear at first glance that he was now in a far more aggressive and bloodthirsty mood. The morning cold irritated him, and he was obviously hungry. With an incessant growl, he paced along the wall furthest from me, his whiskers twitching angrily, his tail lashing the floor. Reaching the corner, he would turn back, each time glancing at me with an expression of mortal threat. I saw that he intended to kill me. Yet even in that moment, I could not help but admire the lithe grace of the devilish creature, his fluid, undulating movements, the sheen of his magnificent fur, the vibrant quiver of his bright red tongue against his coal-black face. The low, angry growling grew louder and louder, never ceasing for a second. The end was surely at hand. Death, it seemed, had reserved the bitterest hour for me. In the cold and gloom, shivering in my light dress coat, I lay stretched upon my grating as if upon a rack. I tried to hearten myself, to lift my spirit, and at the same time, with that sharpness of vision that comes only in utter despair, I searched for a way to escape. One thing was clear to me. If the front wall of the cage could be slid back into place while I was behind it, I should be saved. But how to set it in motion? I feared to move, lest I draw the beast's attention. Slowly, very slowly, I freed my hand and fell for the edge of the grating, the top bar that projected slightly from the wall. Holding it, I found to my surprise that it moved quite easily. The difficulty, of course, was that I would have to move along with the grating. I gave another tug and pulled it out another 3 inches. It was working. I tugged again, and at that moment the cat sprang. I did not see the leap. It happened with such suddenness and speed. I only heard a terrifying roar, and a moment later, the sleek black head, gleaming yellow eyes, red tongue, and dazzling teeth were but an arm's length away from me. From the force of the spring, the grating upon which I lay shuddered, and I thought, if I were capable of thought at such a moment, that I was falling. For a second, the cat hung by his forepaws, his head right beside me, while his hind claws struggled to find a purchase on the bars. I heard the screech of his claws against the wire mesh and nearly fainted from the creature's fetid breath. But the leap had failed. The beast could not maintain such a position for long. Slowly, with a savage snarl and a furious scratching at the bars, he swung back and dropped heavily to the floor. Growling, he immediately turned his face up toward me and prepared for a second spring. I realized that my fate was being decided. The lesson would not be lost on the predator. He would not make the same mistake twice. I had to act with lightning speed and absolute fearlessness. My life was at stake. A plan formed instantly. Ripping off my dress coat, I flung it straight at the monster's head. In that same heartbeat, I leaped to the floor, seized the edge of the front grating, and with frantic strength dragged it toward me. It moved more easily than I had dared to hope. I rushed across the room, hauling it after me, positioned on its outer side. Had I remained there, I should have been safe. Alas, I had to stop to slip through the gap I had left. The momentary delay was enough for the beast to rid himself of the coat and spring upon me. I threw myself into the passage and slammed the grating shut, but the predator managed to hook my leg. With one sweep of his mighty paw, he ripped open my calf, shearing the muscle as a plane shears a shaving from a board. In the next second, bleeding and failing, I collapsed onto the foul straw, but the life-saving bars now separated me from the beast that lunged furiously against them. Too mangled to move and too exhausted to feel fear, I lay there, half dead, and watched him. Pressing his powerful black chest against the bars, he still tried to reach me with his clawed paws, like a kitten with a mouse in a trap. He shredded my clothes, but try as he might, he could not reach me. I had heard before that wounds inflicted by large carnivores cause a peculiar numbness, and now I experienced it myself. I lost all sense of self and watched the beast's assaults with the interest of a detached spectator. Gradually, I drifted into a world of vague visions, through which the black face and flickering red tongue would occasionally appear, until at last I sank into unconsciousness, or perhaps that nirvana where the tormented find blessed peace. Reconstructing the events later, I concluded that I lay senseless for about 2 hours. My stupor was broken by that same metallic clang which had been the herald of my nightmare. It was the click of the lock. Before I was even fully conscious, I saw the round, jovial face of my dear cousin in the doorway. The sight that met his eyes clearly stunned him. The cat was resting, stretched out upon the floor. I lay in the cage on my back in a pool of blood, in nothing but my shirt and tattered trousers. To this day, I can see his astonished face illuminated by the morning sun. He stared and stared at me. Then he closed the door behind him and walked toward the grating to see whether I was alive or not. I cannot say for certain what happened next. I was the last person then fit to act as a witness or chronicler. Suddenly, I saw the back of his head. He had turned away from me and was looking at the beast. "What is the matter, Tommy?" he cried. "What is the matter with you?" He kept backing away further and further until his back was right against the bars. "Down, you mindless brute!" he roared. "Down, sir! Have you forgotten your master?" Then, a phrase of his surfaced in my clouded brain. He had said that the taste of blood could turn the Brazilian cat into a very devil. The blood was mine, but it was he who had to pay the price. "Get back!" he shrieked. "Back, you dog! Baldwin! Baldwin! Oh, my God!" I heard him fall, rise, and fall again, and then there came another sound like the rending of cloth. His screams, muffled by the roaring of the tiger cat, grew weaker and weaker. At last, when I already believed him dead, I saw him for the last time, as if in a fever dream. Blood-stained and mangled, he ran blindly across the room, and then I lost consciousness once more. I was many months in recovering. Indeed, a full recovery was out of the question, and to the end of my days, my cane will remain with me, a souvenir of that night with the Brazilian cat. When Baldwin and the other servants rushed in at their master's desperate cries, they could not at first comprehend what had happened. I lay behind the bars, while his remains, or rather, what was later identified as his remains, were held in the claws of the beast he himself had reared. Only by the use of red-hot iron bars was the predator forced to release its prey, after which it was shot through the window and the door. Only then was I rescued from my prison. I was carried to a bedroom where, under the very roof of my intended murderer, I hovered between life and death for several weeks. A surgeon was summoned from Clipton and a nurse from London, and after a month, I was finally strong enough to endure the journey home to Grosvenor Mansions. My memory has preserved one recollection which, were it not so vivid, I might have dismissed as one of the many feverish delusions of a delirious brain. One night, while the nurse was away for a moment, the door of my room opened, and a tall woman, dressed from head to foot in black, glided in. Approaching me, she bent her pale face over mine, and in the dim light of the night lamp, I recognized the Brazilian, my cousin's widow. She peered into my eyes with an expression far softer than before. "Are you conscious?" she asked. I only gave a weak nod. My strength was returning, but slowly. "It is well. I only wish to say that you have yourself to blame. I did all for you that I could. From the very first, I wished to have you out of the house. By every means short of open treachery, I tried to save you from my husband. I knew he had not summoned you by chance. I knew he would never let you leave alive. Who should know him better than I, who have suffered at his hands as no one else? I did not dare tell you the whole truth. He would have killed me, but I did what was in my power. As it turned out, you have done me an inestimable service. You have set me free when I thought I should be tormented to the end of my days. I am sorry that you are crippled, but I have nothing to reproach myself for. I called you a fool, and indeed, you acted like a fool." She slipped out of the room, a strange, angular woman, and I never saw her again. Having sold her husband's property, she returned to her native land, and rumor has it she is now a nun somewhere in Pernambuco. After lying at home for some time, I finally received permission from the doctors to attend to my affairs. I felt no particular joy at this, for I dreaded the onslaught of my creditors. But the first to take advantage of the permission was my lawyer, Summers. "How glad I am to see your lordship on the mend," he said. "I have waited so long for the opportunity to congratulate you." "What lordship, Summers? This is no time for jesting." "I'm not jesting," he replied. "You have been Lord Sotherton for 6 weeks now, but we fear to tell you, lest it hinder your recovery." "Lord Sotherton, one of the richest men in England. I could hardly believe my ears, and suddenly I was struck by a strange coincidence of dates. Lord Southerton must have died at about the same time this affair happened to me, on the very same day. Summers looked at me searchingly, and I am certain, for he is as sharp as they come, that he had guessed the whole truth. He paused, as if waiting for me to confirm his thoughts, but I saw no reason to make a public matter of a family scandal. A strange coincidence, beyond doubt, he continued with a knowing look. You are aware, of course, that your cousin, Everard King, was the next nearest relative to the late lord after yourself. Had that tiger mangled you instead of him, it is he who would have become Lord Southerton. Undoubtedly, I agreed, and he was very much interested in the matter, said Summers. I am told that he paid Lord Southerton's valet to send him telegrams several times a day regarding the master's health. That was at the very time you were guest there. Is it not strange that he required such minute information, knowing well that he was not the direct heir? Very strange indeed, I replied. And now, Summers, bring me the bills and a new checkbook, and let us begin to put my affairs in order.